Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you would have signed anything they placed in front of you? I did. And that mistake cost me everything. My name is Claire, and the person who destroyed my future wasn't a stranger, a scammer, or an enemy. It was my brother. The same brother who carried me home when I scraped my knee as a child. The same brother who stood beside me at our parents' funeral and promised we would always take care of each other. For 26 years, I believed he was the one person who would never hurt me. But one signature changed everything. One transfer emptied my savings, and one lie exposed a secret that would destroy our family forever. When I finally learned what my brother had done, I realized he hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen years of my life, but what he didn't know was that I was about to take back something far more valuable than money, his future. My name is Claire. And this is the story of how the person I trusted most became the person who betrayed me the deepest. Growing up, Ethan wasn't just my brother. He was my hero. He was 3 years older than me, taller, louder, and far more confident than I ever was. Wherever Ethan went, people seemed drawn to him. He had a way of making everyone feel comfortable around him. When I was little, I followed him everywhere. If Ethan climbed a tree, I climbed a tree. If Ethan played soccer, I played soccer. If Ethan said something was cool, I instantly agreed. That's how much I admired him. Our parents used to laugh about it. Claire thinks Ethan can do no wrong, my mother would say. Back then, she wasn't wrong. I truly believed Ethan was the best person in the world. We grew up in a modest house on a quiet street where everyone knew everyone else's name. Life wasn't luxurious. We didn't have expensive vacations. We didn't own fancy cars. But we had something far more valuable. We had each other. My father worked long hours to support the family. My mother filled our home with warmth, laughter, and love. Every Sunday evening we ate dinner together. No phones, no distractions, just family. Those dinners became some of my favorite memories. Looking back now, I realize how precious those moments were. Because eventually, everything changed. I was 20 years old when my mother became seriously ill. At first, the doctors seemed optimistic. They told us there was hope. They told us treatments were available. They told us to stay positive. And we tried. For months, our family fought beside her. We attended appointments. We sat beside hospital beds. We prayed. We hoped. But hope wasn't enough. The day we lost her felt like the world had stopped turning. I remember standing at her funeral feeling completely numb. People spoke to me. They hugged me. They offered condolences. But their words sounded distant, like voices underwater. Nothing felt real. The only thing keeping me standing was Ethan. He stayed beside me the entire day. When I cried, he held my hand. When I couldn't speak, he spoke for me. When I thought I couldn't survive the pain, he reminded me I wasn't alone. For the first time in my life, I truly depended on him, and he never let me down, or so I thought. 2 years later, tragedy struck again. We lost our father unexpectedly. The grief was even harder the second time, because now there was no parent left, no safety net, no one to call for advice. No one to tell us everything would be okay. Just Ethan and me, standing alone in the world. After the funeral, we sat together in silence for hours. Neither of us knew what to say. Eventually, Ethan looked at me and said something I'll never forget. No matter what happens, Claire, we'll always have each other. I believed him, with all my heart. Years passed. Life slowly moved forward. The pain never disappeared completely, but it became easier to carry. I focused on building a future. Ever since I was a teenager, I had dreamed of starting my own graphic design business. I loved creating things, logos, brand identities, marketing materials. Anything that allowed me to turn ideas into reality, but dreams require money. And money was something I didn't have, so I worked, and worked, and worked. While friends traveled, I stayed home. While others spent money on entertainment, I saved every extra dollar. I worked full-time during the day. At night, I accepted freelance projects. Weekends became workdays. Vacations became opportunities to earn more. Sometimes I felt exhausted. Sometimes I wondered if all the sacrifice was worth it, but then I would imagine opening my own studio. I would picture my name on the door. I would imagine finally building something that belonged to me, and suddenly the sacrifices felt worth it again. Year after year, my savings grew, slowly. Painfully but steadily, then something unexpected happened. My father's estate was finally settled. The inheritance wasn't massive. But combined with my savings, it gave me enough money to seriously consider launching my business. For the first time, my dream felt real. I started researching office spaces, creating business plans, meeting potential clients. The future looked brighter than it ever had before, and that's when Ethan approached me with an opportunity. At first, it seemed harmless. One evening, he invited me to dinner. We laughed, shared memories, talked about life. Then he leaned forward and lowered his voice. "I've been working on something big." I smiled. "What kind of big?" "A real estate investment." I raised an eyebrow. "Since when are you involved in real estate?" He laughed. "It's complicated." Over the next hour, Ethan explained everything. Or at least what I believed was everything. According to him, he had partnered with experienced investors who specialized in purchasing undervalued properties. The profits sounded impressive. The projections looked promising, and most importantly, Ethan seemed confident, very confident. At first, I wasn't interested. Real estate wasn't my area of expertise. I preferred to focus on my business, but Ethan didn't pressure me. He simply planted the idea. Then over the following weeks, he continued mentioning it. Casually, naturally, never aggressively. Whenever we met, he'd provide small updates. "The properties are doing great. The investors are happy. The returns are looking even better than expected." Slowly, my skepticism began to fade. After all, this was Ethan, the brother who had protected me my entire life, the brother who had helped me survive our parents' deaths, the brother who had never given me a reason to doubt him. At least that's what I believed. One afternoon, he showed me detailed spreadsheets and financial projections. Everything looked professional, organized, legitimate. I remember studying the documents carefully. Part of me still felt uncertain, but another part of me trusted Ethan completely. Then he said something that changed everything. "I've invested my own money too." That statement carried enormous weight, because if Ethan trusted the opportunity enough to risk his own savings, why shouldn't I? Weeks later, he asked me a simple question. "Have you made a decision?" I stared at him. My brother, my family, the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. And finally, I nodded. "Yes." His face immediately lit up. "You won't regret this." I smiled. At the time, I believed him. I genuinely believed we were building something together. I genuinely believed this investment would help secure my future. I genuinely believed my brother wanted the best for me. The next morning, I sat in front of my computer and logged into my bank account. Years of hard work stared back at me from the screen. Years of sacrifice, years of discipline, years of dreaming. My finger hovered above the confirmation button. For a moment, I hesitated. Something felt strange, not wrong, just strange, almost as if a small voice deep inside me was trying to warn me. But I ignored it because trust is powerful, and blind trust can be dangerous. I clicked the button. The money disappeared from my account, transferred, gone. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. I thought I had just taken the biggest step toward my future. What I didn't know was that I had actually taken the first step toward losing everything. And somewhere else in the city, my brother looked at the transfer notification on his phone. Then he smiled. At the time, I thought it was the smile of a loving brother. Months later, I would realize it was the smile of a man who had just stolen my future. The moment I transferred the money, I felt relieved. For years, I had worked myself to exhaustion trying to build a future. Now, for the first time, it felt like my money was finally working for me, or at least that's what I believed. The first few weeks passed without any problems. Ethan occasionally sent updates. Nothing detailed, just enough information to keep me reassured. "Everything is going well. The investors are excited. We're ahead of schedule." Whenever I asked questions, he always seemed confident. and confidence can be incredibly convincing, especially when it comes from someone you trust. At first, I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't a business partner I barely knew. This was my brother. The same person who had spent most of his life protecting me. The same person who had stood beside me through every major loss I'd ever experienced. If there was one person in the world who deserved my trust, it was Ethan. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. 3 months after the transfer, I met Ethan for coffee. I remember feeling excited. I wanted to hear how everything was progressing. Maybe there was already good news. Maybe my investment was growing faster than expected. As soon as we sat down, I asked the question, "So how are things going?" For a split second, something changed in Ethan's face. It happened so quickly most people wouldn't have noticed, but I did. A tiny flicker of discomfort, gone almost instantly, then he smiled. "Everything's great." The answer sounded normal, but something felt different. I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was his tone. Maybe it was the hesitation before he spoke, or maybe my instincts were already trying to warn me. Still, I pushed the feeling aside. People hesitate sometimes. It didn't mean anything. Right. The following month, I asked for documentation. Not because I was suspicious, because I was excited. I wanted to organize my financial records, track progress, understand the investment better. Ethan nodded immediately. "Of course, I'll send everything over." Days passed. Nothing arrived. A week later, I reminded him. "Oh, sorry," he said. "I've been busy. I'll send it tonight." He didn't. Another week passed. Still nothing. That was the first time genuine concern entered my mind. Not panic, not fear, just concern. When I asked again, Ethan became slightly irritated. "You worry too much." I laughed awkwardly. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was overthinking things, but a small voice inside me kept growing louder. Something wasn't right. 6 months after investing, I still hadn't seen a single official report. No statements, no contracts, no proof of growth. Nothing. Whenever I requested information, Ethan always had an explanation. The accountant was busy, the paperwork was delayed, the investors were restructuring. There was always a reason, always an excuse, never any evidence. I began sleeping less. The anxiety followed me everywhere. At work, at home, even during simple daily tasks. I found myself constantly checking my phone, waiting for documents that never arrived. Waiting for answers that never came. One evening, I called Ethan. "I'm starting to get worried." There was silence, then a sigh. "Claire, why don't you trust me?" The question hit me hard. Because I did trust him. I trusted him more than anyone. And somehow he had turned my concerns into guilt. Immediately, I apologized. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that." "It's fine," he said. But his voice sounded cold. That conversation stayed with me for days. Something felt wrong. Yet every time I tried to examine those feelings, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Because accepting the alternative felt impossible. Accepting the alternative meant questioning my brother, and I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. Months continued passing. The excitement I once felt had completely disappeared. It had been replaced by uncertainty, then fear, then something much worse, doubt. One afternoon, while cleaning my apartment, I found an old notebook where I'd written down my business plans. Goals, budgets, dreams, everything I had worked toward. As I turned the pages, an overwhelming sadness washed over me. That money wasn't just money. It represented years of sacrifice, years of believing in myself, years of building something meaningful. And suddenly, I realized something. I didn't actually know where my money was. That realization terrified me. For the first time, I decided to stop relying solely on Ethan's explanations. I needed answers, real answers. The next morning, I began researching the investment company Ethan had mentioned months earlier. I searched online. Nothing. I searched again. Still nothing. No website, no business records, no reviews, no public information. My heart started racing. There had to be a mistake. Maybe I spelled the name incorrectly. Maybe the company operated privately. Maybe there was a simple explanation. I spent hours searching. Nothing, absolutely nothing. That night I barely slept. Every possibility ran through my mind, every excuse, every explanation, every terrifying question. The next day, I decided to visit the office address Ethan had provided months earlier. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt. Part of me hoped I was being ridiculous. Part of me prayed this entire situation would end with a simple misunderstanding. When I arrived, the building looked normal, professional, busy. People entered and exited throughout the day. For a moment, I felt relieved. Maybe everything was fine. Maybe I had worried for nothing. I walked inside, approached the reception desk, and smiled nervously. "Hi," I said. "I'm looking for the investment company located here." The receptionist looked confused. "What company?" I repeated the name Ethan had given me. She stared at me blankly. "I'm sorry," she said. "We've never had a company by that name here." My stomach dropped. The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter, harder to breathe. "There must be a mistake," she shook her head. "I've worked here for 6 years. That company has never been in this building." For several seconds, I couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't move. I thanked her and walked outside. The moment I reached my car, I burst into tears. Not because I knew the truth, because I was finally beginning to understand it. The drive home felt endless. My mind replayed every conversation I'd had with Ethan over the past year. Every promise, every reassurance, every excuse, and for the first time I started seeing them differently. Not as explanations, as lies. When I arrived home, I sat in complete silence. Hours passed. Darkness filled the apartment. I didn't turn on a single light, I just sat there, trying to accept something I never thought possible. My brother had lied to me. The question was, how much? The following morning, I called him. "Ethan, we need to talk." His voice immediately changed. "About what?" I already knew, and somehow, I think he knew that I knew. "We'll talk tonight." The silence that followed felt endless. Then he quietly said, "Okay." For the rest of the day, my heart wouldn't stop racing. Because deep down, I understood something terrifying. That conversation was about to change my life forever. And by the time it ended, I would discover that losing my money was only the beginning. Cliffhanger that night, Ethan arrived at my apartment. The moment I opened the door, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear, and in that instant I knew, whatever he was about to tell me, was far worse than I had imagined. The moment I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. Ethan looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. His face was pale, his eyes were restless. And for the first time in my life, my brother looked afraid of me, not angry, not annoyed, afraid. Neither of us spoke immediately. He stepped inside my apartment and sat on the couch. I remained standing. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. For nearly a minute, the room was silent. Then I finally asked the question, "Who are you?" Ethan looked up, confused. "What?" I felt tears building behind my eyes. "Because the brother I know wouldn't do this." The silence that followed felt unbearable. "Ethan," my voice broke, "tell me the truth." He looked away. That was all the answer I needed. The truth was real. The lies were real. Everything I feared was real. I sat down across from him. My hands were shaking. "Where's my money?" For several seconds, he didn't respond. Then he quietly said something that shattered me. "It's gone." I felt the air leave my lungs. Gone, such a simple word, yet it destroyed years of dreams in a single moment. "What do you mean it's gone?" His eyes remained fixed on the floor. "I spent it." I couldn't process what I had just heard. Spent it? My inheritance, my savings, the money I'd spent years building. "Gone, spent," my voice rose. "You spent it on what?" He rubbed his face. And then the truth started pouring out, not all at once. Slowly, painfully, like someone pulling pieces of glass from a wound. At first it was small amounts. A few $1,000s here, a few thousand there, then larger amounts, then massive amounts. The deeper he went, the worse it became. Eventually, I learned the truth. The investment never existed, not for a single day. There were no investors, no properties, no partnership, no opportunity, nothing. It had all been a lie from the very beginning. I felt physically sick. Every document he'd shown me had been fabricated. Every projection was fake. Every update was invented. For over a year, my own brother had been lying to my face. And somehow that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came next. "Why?" I whispered. Ethan covered his eyes. For a long moment he couldn't answer. Then he finally spoke. "Gambling." The word hit me like a punch. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Gambling," he nodded. Years earlier, Ethan had started placing small bets. Sports, card games. Online gambling. At first he won. Then he lost. Then he chased those losses. And the deeper he went, the worse things became. Debt after debt. Loan after loan. Lie after lie. By the time he came to me with the fake investment opportunity, he was drowning. Thousands of dollars in debt. Collection agencies calling daily. Creditors demanding payment. His entire life was collapsing, and instead of asking for help, he stole from me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw him out. I wanted to wake up from the nightmare. But mostly, I wanted my brother back. The brother I thought I knew. The brother who protected me. The brother who promised we'd always have each other. That person suddenly felt like a stranger. "How could you do this?" My voice barely rose above a whisper, his eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen." I laughed bitterly. The sound surprised even me. "You didn't mean for it to happen." For the first time, anger broke through the sadness. "You lied to me for over a year. You stole everything. You watched me plan my future while knowing you'd already destroyed it." Ethan couldn't answer, because there was no answer. No explanation, no excuse, only truth, and the truth was ugly. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I stopped sleeping properly, stopped eating properly, stopped caring about things I once loved. Work became difficult. Simple tasks felt exhausting. Every morning, I woke up hoping the nightmare had ended. Every morning, reality returned. Friends noticed something was wrong. I told them only part of the story. The full truth felt too painful to share. How do you explain that the person you trusted most became the person who betrayed you most? How do you explain losing not only your money but your sense of security? Because that's what Ethan stole. Not just my savings, my trust, my confidence, my belief in people. Months passed, I barely spoke to him. Occasionally he sent messages, apologies, excuses, promises to repay me someday. But the words felt empty. The damage had already been done. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. I was cleaning out old boxes from my father's storage unit. The unit hadn't been touched in years. Most of the contents were ordinary, old photographs, tax records, family keepsakes, memories. I almost left without checking one final box hidden in the corner. But something made me open it. Inside was a thick folder, dust covered the surface. The paperwork looked old, important, carefully organized, curious I carried it home. That decision would change everything. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and began reading. At first, the documents seemed confusing. Legal language, financial records, property documents. But as I continued reading, a picture slowly emerged. And what I discovered made my heart race. Years before his death, my father had created a trust, a significant trust. One he had never discussed with me, or at least not in detail. The trust contained investments, property interests, and financial assets. Assets worth far more than the money Ethan had stolen from me. I stared at the documents in disbelief. Why had I never known about this? Then I reached a page that changed everything. A clause, a very specific clause. I read it once, then twice, then 3 times. Each time, my pulse increased. According to the trust agreement, beneficiaries could lose their inheritance if they were found guilty of financial fraud involving family assets or family members. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The words felt unreal, almost too perfect, too unbelievable. I immediately called the attorney listed in the documents. The next morning, I sat across from him in his office. After reviewing everything, he confirmed it. The clause was valid, legally enforceable, and potentially devastating for Ethan. For the first time in months, something changed inside me. The sadness remained, the betrayal remained, the heartbreak remained, but something new appeared beside them. Hope. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted justice. For over a year, Ethan had assumed I was powerless, that I would simply accept what happened, that I would move on, that there would be no consequences. But now, everything had changed. I looked out the attorney's office window and took a deep breath. For months, I had been the victim, broken, lost, destroyed. But sitting there, holding those documents in my hands, I realized I finally had a choice. I could continue mourning what I had lost, or I could start fighting for what was right. And for the first time since the betrayal began, I chose to fight. Cliffhanger: as I left the attorney's office, my phone vibrated. A message from Ethan. "Claire, I really need to talk to you. Something is happening." I stared at the screen, because while Ethan was asking for help, he had absolutely no idea what I had just discovered, and if my attorney was right, his entire future was about to collapse. For more than a year, I had been living with the consequences of Ethan's betrayal. Every sleepless night, every anxious thought, every shattered dream. I carried all of it alone. But now, for the first time, things were changing. Not because the pain was gone, not because I had forgiven him, but because I finally understood something important. The truth has a way of catching up with people. No matter how long they run from it, no matter how carefully they hide it, sooner or later it arrives. And when it does, the consequences can be impossible to escape. As I drove home from the attorney's office, Ethan's message kept replaying in my mind. "Claire, I really need to talk to you. Something is happening." A year earlier, I would have rushed to help him. I would have dropped everything. I would have done whatever I could to make his life easier. But a year earlier, I still believed he cared about me. Now everything was different. I didn't answer immediately. For once, I wasn't the one chasing answers. I wasn't the one begging for honesty. I wasn't the one living in fear. That burden finally belonged to him. 3 days later, Ethan called again. Then again, then again. The calls became more frequent. The messages became more desperate. Eventually, I agreed to meet him. Not because I wanted to, because I needed information. We met at a small cafe across town. The moment I saw him, I realized how much he had changed. His confidence was gone. His smile was gone. Even his posture looked different. He seemed smaller somehow, like the weight of his choices was finally becoming too heavy to carry. He sat down across from me. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned forward. "Claire, I'm in trouble." I looked at him quietly. Part of me remembered all the times he'd said those exact words before. The difference was that this time, I wasn't rushing to save him. "What kind of trouble?" He rubbed his hands together nervously. "The debts." My stomach tightened. Apparently, the money he stole from me hadn't solved anything. It had only delayed the inevitable. The gambling losses had continued. The debts had grown. The people demanding repayment had become more aggressive. And now, according to Ethan, everything was collapsing. As he spoke, I listened carefully, not because I felt sympathy, because I wanted to understand how deep the damage really went. The answer shocked me. It was deeper than I imagined, much deeper. Over the next several weeks, I worked closely with my attorney. We gathered evidence. Every bank transfer, every email, every text message, every false document, every lie. The process was exhausting. Some days I spent hours reviewing records. Other days, I sat in meetings discussing legal strategies. And every time I looked at the evidence, I felt the same thing: disbelief. How had I missed so many warning signs? How had someone I trusted so completely deceived me so thoroughly? The answer wasn't complicated. Trust. Trust had blinded me. Because when someone earns your trust over decades, you stop looking for deception. You stop questioning motives. You stop imagining betrayal. And that's exactly what Ethan had relied on. One evening, my attorney called with an update. The investigation was progressing faster than expected. Additional financial records had surfaced. Records Ethan probably hoped would never be found. The new evidence painted an even darker picture. Not only had he stolen my money, he had manipulated multiple people: friends, business associates, even distant relatives. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Lie, manipulate, borrow, hide, repeat. For years, Ethan had been living two separate lives, the brother I knew, and the man he truly was. The realization broke my heart all over again, because I wasn't just losing trust in Ethan. I was losing trust in my own memories. How much of our relationship had been real? How much had been an illusion? Questions like that can haunt a person. Eventually, the attorney filed formal legal claims. The moment the paperwork was submitted, everything changed. Ethan finally understood the situation was serious, very serious. The phone calls became constant. Voicemails, emails, messages, apologies, excuses, promises. At one point, he even showed up at my apartment unexpectedly. When I opened the door, he looked desperate. "Please," he said, "we can figure this out." I stared at him. For a moment, I saw flashes of the brother I once loved. The brother who protected me, the brother who comforted me after our parents died. But then I remembered the lies, the fake documents, the stolen savings, the year of manipulation, and those memories disappeared. We had a chance to figure it out. My voice remained calm. "You destroyed that chance." For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then he quietly asked, "Do you really want to do this?" The question almost made me laugh. As though I had created this situation, as though I was responsible for the consequences. "No, Ethan," I said softly, "you did this." Then I closed the door. That night I cried. Not because I regretted my decision, because accepting reality still hurt. No matter how justified the consequences were. Months passed. The legal case continued building momentum. Evidence piled higher. Witnesses provided statements. Financial experts reviewed records. Every week seemed to bring new discoveries, and every discovery made Ethan's position weaker. Then one afternoon, my attorney called with major news. The trust administrators had reviewed the evidence. They were taking the allegations seriously, very seriously. A formal review had begun. My heart pounded as I listened, because we both knew what that meant. The inheritance clause, the one Ethan never knew existed, the clause that could change everything. For years, Ethan had viewed that inheritance as his safety net, his future, his backup plan, the asset that would eventually solve his financial problems. But now, that future was hanging by a thread. And he didn't even know it yet. The following week, I received another message. This one was different, short, simple, almost frightening. "Claire, someone contacted me about Dad's trust." I stared at the screen. Then I slowly placed the phone down, because the moment had finally arrived. The truth was no longer approaching. It was here, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan was the one feeling afraid. Days later, we entered another legal hearing. The atmosphere felt different, more serious. More final. The attorneys seemed confident. The evidence was overwhelming. Even Ethan's own lawyer appeared concerned. As proceedings continued, I watched Ethan closely. He looked exhausted, defeated. And for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, fear of consequences, fear of losing everything, fear of finally facing the results of his own choices. After the hearing ended, he approached me outside. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Claire!" I stopped walking. For several seconds, he struggled to speak. Then he finally asked the question. "What happens if I lose?" I looked at him carefully. The answer felt obvious, but somehow saying it out loud carried enormous weight. "You lose the future you stole from yourself." His eyes widened, and in that moment I knew he finally understood. The inheritance, the trust, the legal consequences, everything. The reality had finally reached him, and there was no escaping it now. Cliffhanger. 1 week later, the final ruling was scheduled. The evidence had been presented. The investigations were complete. The decision would determine whether Ethan kept the inheritance he had counted on for years, or lost everything. As I walked into the courthouse that morning, I saw Ethan standing alone. Looking terrified, because deep down, I think he already knew what was coming. The morning of the final ruling felt strangely calm. For months, I had imagined this day, the court hearings. The evidence, The endless meetings with attorneys, the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the fear, the uncertainty, and now it was finally here, the day everything would be decided. As I walked toward the courthouse, the sky was gray and overcast. The air felt heavy, almost as if the world itself understood the importance of what was about to happen. I spotted Ethan standing near the entrance. Alone. For a moment, I barely recognized him. The confident man who once believed he could talk his way out of anything was gone. The brother who always seemed in control was gone. In his place stood someone exhausted, someone broken, someone finally facing the consequences of years of deception. When he noticed me, our eyes met briefly. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us waved. There was nothing left to say. We entered the building separately. And for the next several hours, we sat on opposite sides of a courtroom. Two people connected by blood, separated by betrayal. As the proceedings began, I listened quietly. Most of the evidence had already been reviewed during previous hearings. The financial records, the fabricated investment documents, the bank transfers, the witness statements, the expert reports. Every piece of evidence pointed toward the same conclusion. The investment opportunity Ethan presented had never existed. The money had been obtained through deception. And the consequences of that deception were now impossible to ignore. As the attorneys presented their final arguments, I found myself staring at the wooden table in front of me. Not because I was nervous, because I was thinking about everything that had happened, the years of trust, the memories, the promises, the lies, the moment I clicked that transfer button. The day I discovered the company didn't exist, the night Ethan admitted the truth, it all felt like a lifetime ago. Eventually, the judge began speaking. The courtroom became completely silent. Every word seemed to echo through the room. My heart pounded, not because I doubted the outcome, because hearing it would make everything real. The ruling was clear. The court determined that Ethan had knowingly misrepresented the investment. He had intentionally deceived me. He had unlawfully obtained and misused the funds. And the evidence supporting those conclusions was overwhelming. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The words simply hung in the air, permanent, unavoidable, final. Then came the consequence Ethan feared most. The trust administrators had reviewed the findings. Based on the language contained within the trust agreement, Ethan's inheritance rights would be revoked. Effective immediately. Gone, just like that. Years of expectations, years of assumptions. Years of believing that inheritance would eventually rescue him. Gone. The future he had counted on no longer existed. I slowly closed my eyes, not because I felt happy. Because I felt something far more complicated. Relief. The truth had finally won. The lies had finally ended, and the person responsible was finally being held accountable. When the hearing concluded, people slowly began leaving the courtroom. Attorneys gathered documents. Court staff organized paperwork. Conversations filled the room, but I remained seated, trying to process everything. Eventually, I stood and walked toward the exit. As I reached the hallway, I heard a familiar voice. "Claire!" I turned around. Ethan stood several feet away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he slowly approached. His eyes looked different. Not angry, not defensive, not manipulative, just tired, deeply tired. "I guess it's over." His voice sounded hollow. I nodded. "Yes." Silence followed. Then he asked something I never expected. "Do you hate me?" The question caught me off guard. For years, I had imagined this moment. The confrontation, the anger, the satisfaction. But standing there, I didn't feel hatred. Not anymore. Hatred requires energy. And I was tired of carrying that weight. I looked at him carefully. The brother who taught me how to ride a bicycle. The brother who comforted me after our mother's death. The brother who betrayed me. All those versions of Ethan seemed to exist at the same time, and somehow that made everything even sadder. "No," I answered honestly. "I don't hate you." His eyes filled with tears. For a moment, I thought he might speak, but no words came. Then I continued. "I just don't trust you anymore." Those words seemed to hit harder than anything else. Because trust was the one thing neither court decisions nor apologies could restore. Once broken, some things never return. Tears rolled down his face. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine regret. Not regret for getting caught, regret for what he had done, regret for the damage, regret for the relationship he destroyed. But some realizations arrive too late, and some consequences cannot be undone. Eventually, Ethan nodded, then quietly walked away. That was the last conversation we had for a very long time. The months that followed were surprisingly peaceful. Not easy, but peaceful. For so long, my life had revolved around betrayal, investigations, court dates, evidence, stress. Now all of that was over. For the first time in years, I could focus on myself again. I could focus on rebuilding. And that's exactly what I did. Starting over wasn't simple. I still didn't have the money Ethan had stolen. Most of it was gone forever. But I had something else: experience, determination, and a renewed understanding of my own strength. I returned to the dream I had almost abandoned. The graphic design business. At first, progress was slow. I worked from a small apartment, taking whatever projects I could find. Some months were difficult, some months were discouraging. But unlike before, every success belonged entirely to me. Nobody could take credit for it, nobody could steal it, nobody could destroy it, because I built it myself. One client became two. Two became 10, 10 became dozens. Slowly, my business grew. Year after year, it became stronger. And with every milestone, I felt a little more whole again. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It's a gradual process. 1,000 small steps forward. 1,000 moments where you choose growth instead of bitterness. Eventually, I realized something important. The greatest victory wasn't the court ruling. It wasn't the inheritance. It wasn't watching Ethan face consequences. The greatest victory was refusing to let his betrayal define the rest of my life. Because that's the danger of betrayal. If we're not careful, it can become our identity, our entire story, our entire future. I refused to let that happen. Years later, I occasionally heard updates about Ethan. His life was difficult. He struggled financially. He spent years rebuilding the damage he created. I never celebrated his suffering. Because despite everything, he was still my brother. But I also understood something important. Every consequence he faced came from choices he made himself. Not from me, not from the courts. Not from fate, his own choices. And that truth mattered. Today, when people ask me what I learned from everything that happened, my answer is always the same. Trust is valuable. But trust should never replace wisdom. Love people, support people, believe in people, but never ignore warning signs simply because someone is family. Because betrayal doesn't become less painful when it comes from someone you love. Sometimes it becomes even more painful. Yet despite all of that, I don't consider my story a tragedy. Because a tragedy would have been allowing betrayal to destroy me permanently. A tragedy would have been giving up. A tragedy would have been becoming bitter. Instead, I rebuilt. I healed. I grew stronger. My brother stole everything he could reach. My savings, my plans, my future, or at least he thought he did. What he never understood was this: money can be stolen. Opportunities can be stolen. Even years can be stolen. But resilience cannot. Strength cannot. The ability to rise again cannot. And in the end, those were the things that mattered most. Because my brother took my future, but I took back my life.